Well, good morning. Take your Bibles, turn them to Acts 28:1. Kids, you are dismissed. Have a great time in Fort Kids. And while they're heading out, we're going to recognize somebody very special for a major life milestone on Saturday. Donnie Lewis, our student pastor, graduated with his master's degree. So congratulations, Donnie. Donnie is in the back of the room this morning, back there in the media booth. And here's what we're going to do. On the count of three, we're going to say some very special words. We're going to say, congratulations, Master Donnie, all right? So on the count of three, 1, 2, 3, congratulations, Master Donnie. Hey, it's official, man. It's official. You're appreciated. Love it, love it. Well, hey, I want to bring your attention back to Acts chapter 28, verse 1, if you haven't turned there already. I was a history major in college, and one of the things that we studied, I took a course on French history. And in that course, we learned a lot about Napoleon. If you're a history buff and you know about Napoleon's Russian campaign and how he always wanted to conquer Russia. Well, on June 24th, 1812, Napoleon launched his Russian campaign. I believe there's a graphic back there for this. So this graphic was made to really show the numbers of people that he lost in the battles. Now, if you study the campaign, he was massively successful in conquering areas. However, there were two things that really determined that this campaign was a failure. He miscalculated the size of the country and how harsh the weather was. He left in June thinking, it'll just take me a couple of months. I'll be in Moscow by the winter and we'll be done. We'll have this thing won. I will conquer Russia. However, the harsh weather, the significant altitude, and the fact that he had to leave behind a lot of his cannons and other supplies meant that he could not get to Moscow in the time he wanted. The second thing was that he couldn't overcome a tactic that the Russians began to use on him called scorched earth. So as he would move into a city and conquer the city, and the Russians would retreat, they would burn everything, absolutely everything. They would scorch the entire city. They would scorch the farmland around there. And what Napoleon was hoping on in getting into Russia was that as he conquered a town, he could pillage the town, take the resources from it, and then keep pushing deeper and deeper and deeper. So his supply lines dried up on him. And as he turned around from Moscow in the winter and went back to France, he left France with 422,000 soldiers and returned with approximately 8,000 soldiers. Massive, massive failure with a death rate of 98.5%, with the majority of those coming from malnutrition, disease, and not actually from warfare. Many scholars look at Napoleon's story of his failed Russian campaign to emphasize the need to plan ahead and to make sure that our supply lines, when we do things in the military or we do things in life, do things as organizations, that we don't outrun the supply lines to give us strength. Now, here's the thing. When you and I serve God, you and I have a tension in our life where we plan to do things for God, but there's also a certain sense of dependence upon God. And there's the supply lines where God gives us enough strength, God gives us enough love, He gives us enough grace, He gives us enough wisdom to do the things He wants us to do. But we have to look at life and go, okay, I'm going to try to plan out the best that I can. I really believe very strongly from the Bible, there's a great instance of story after story after story of people in the Bible planning and strategizing. But here's some things that we just can't count on. We can't count on how long some things are going to happen. Has God ever told you that something was going to happen and it took like years or a long, long time for it to happen? Anybody besides me? Just me, all right? I feel alone in this one right now. Maybe God works different for y'all. I don't know. But there's been things in my life where God has like told me, hey, I really want you to go in this direction. I want you to serve in this way. Here's some dreams I'm going to put into your life. And it's taken years, if not decades, to be able to get there. And then on the other side of things, have you ever like started to do something for God and just Satan attacked you and made it really, really hard, and what you thought was going to be very easy became very difficult? Anybody? Okay, more of us are being honest this morning, all right? So here's the thing. Just like Napoleon's trip, there were some things he couldn't calculate for, but there was also some things that he had no idea about that caused him to struggle and eventually fail. And I have some really good news for you this morning. In fact, it's going to be the main statement that comes up on the screen for you this morning. God's plans never outrun his provision. God's plans never outrun his provision. But we're going to catch up in Acts chapter 28 today with Paul. And Paul's in a unique situation because he's been traveling, he's trying to get to Rome, and he hasn't gotten there yet. And there's some things that happened in chapter 27 that I'm going to talk about in just a second. There's some things that happened in chapter 28 that if we were in Paul's shoes, we probably would be asking the question, God, is this your plan for me? Because God, I feel like I'm out of provision here. God, I feel like the things you've given me to do, the things you've called me to do, God, I'm out of. And maybe you're here this morning and man, when you and your wife got married or you and your husband got married, y'all were like in love and the butterflies were going like crazy, right? And now it's been some years, you've had some kids, and you've become more like roommates than lovers. And you're like, well, God used to provide me the agape love I needed for my spouse, and now, man, have you smelled their morning breath, right? And like you're trying, you have great morning breath, Shasta. I'm just going to say that just publicly. But there's things that have happened in your life to where now it's taken away, man, the burning passion that you may have had for your spouse. Or maybe you went to a job and you're like, man, God has put me in this place. It's really great. It's where God's going to use me. And you've gotten to that job and it's not been the way that you thought it was going to be. The bosses aren't as nice as what you thought they were going to be. The job is way more intense than what you thought it was going to be. There's been a shift in pay you didn't expect to have happen. There's just been some things that have happened that you didn't expect. Maybe when you went to high school students, you're like, man, high school's going to be awesome. I'm going to start driving. I'm going to be independent. My parents are going to have to check on me. And you got to text your parents when you get to school every day. And you got to like let everybody know what's going on. Your teachers aren't as fun. You thought you're going to have all this freedom, and now you don't have it. And you're like, I don't like this. And there's just moments in life where we felt like God's plan was going this way, but we always fight tensions of feeling like, where is his provision for us in this season of life? And if you haven't felt that, you're going to. So join me this morning in Acts chapter 28, verse 1. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all because it had begun to rain and was cold. If you remember a couple weeks ago back in Acts chapter 27, as we walked through chapter 27, we talked about Paul was sailing for Rome, and he was leaving at a dangerous time of the year. He was leaving at winter. And winter, we know, brings massive storms onto bodies of water. And Paul was constantly warning people, speaking up to the sailors, saying, guys, this is not wise. Guys, this is not wise. And we saw throughout Acts chapter 27 that people ignored Paul at the beginning, but because of his faith and because he kept speaking up for God, that people began to listen to him. And eventually the ship wrecked, but it wrecked safely to the point that everyone on the ship could escape. Now, that brings us up to chapter 28. In fact, if you saw in verse 1, it says we were brought safely through. It brought safely through in that massive storm where people are throwing their possessions overboard, trying to lighten the ship for fear of the waves crashing over and the ship sinking. We talked about Paul being a first responder, that he was not just sitting back, just watching. He was engaging and bringing hope. And we talked about for us as Christians, that when we look out at our world and our world is harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, that those terms were like helpless, like a ship without a rudder, that you and I know people who are brought to and fro in life and just knocked around by life, and that we as Christians get to respond to their needs and we get to bring peace and hope in Jesus. And now in Acts chapter 28, we find that Paul is stranded on an island, and all the supplies that they needed on the ship were thrown overboard and were in the bottom of the sea. They need a ship to continue to go inland, and they're stuck on an island. Have you ever been in a place in life where you just felt like you were all alone on an island and nobody got you? You could watch other people do great things, but for you, you're like, where's mine, God? I mean, God, they get to do this. God, they get to do that. God, where is mine? And look, it just got even worse for Paul. In verse number 2, it says that there were native people on the island. Now, translators have been far kinder to the Bible than what Luke was. Luke actually used the Greek word for barbarian. So imagine this. You think that you are on the route that God wants you to be on in your life. You've been through a massive storm, and in the storm, you get shipwrecked onto an island, and you're going, God, where's my ship? God, where's my supplies? And then you look out, and there's a massive group of barbarians walking towards you, and in your mind, you're going, am I about to be lunch? and that's Paul. The native or the Greek word here for barbarian actually was a term that was used for people who just didn't speak Greek as other Romans did, but they were looked down upon. And Luke's like, hey, this is the group of people that are with us. Why is that important? What we see throughout the book of Acts is that there are people who are ostracized and kicked out of the church that God brings in, and he uses people, and he unifies all types of people from every ethnicity, every tongue, every language, every skin color to bring them together because God wants all people to be in a relationship with him. So hold on to that thought because we're going to pick it up in just a moment. But let's bring all this together. Paul is shipwrecked on his way to Rome. No ship, no supplies, with barbarians that are walking towards him. Could you understand if Paul may have asked himself or even prayed to God and said, God, where's the help? Could you understand if Paul had gotten a little frustrated? Could you understand if Paul in this moment is going, this is not going the way that I thought it was going to go, God? And he probably got a little frustrated like we sometimes do. We went down to we have a family farm down in Gordon County, and we went down there Friday night, and I was building a fire, and I had to break some sticks to get them into the fireplace, and I brought them into the house, and Ellen was standing there, and she was watching, and she's like, Daddy, can I help? And I said, yeah, you can help me break some sticks. So she got I was breaking up sticks for kindling, and she grabbed one, and she snapped it, and then she grabbed the next one, and she's like, Daddy, I can't do it. Well, Woodson, anything that Ellen does, Woodson, our almost 2-year-old, does. So Woodson is like watching all this, and he's like, like a little penguin comes over. He grabs a hold of the stick, and he looks at me and goes, and just like shakes. Like anytime he really tries something hard, he's like, all right? And he couldn't break it. And Ellen goes, she grabs the stick, and she goes, Daddy, you're big and you're strong. Will you break the stick? And I was like, yes, my daughter. I'll be your hero, knight in shining armor, right? And I took the stick, and Shasta and I have been talking about trying to make like teachable moments out of things. And I said, Ellen, the reason I can break the stick is because I take all the naps that I'm supposed to take, and I eat all the food that I'm supposed to eat, and I've also broken a lot of sticks. And she was like, okay, Daddy. But I thought about that in light of this passage, and there was a great hymn writer from back in the 1800s who wrote a hymn off of Isaiah 43. And look at these words that come up on the screen from John Greenleaf Whittier. And if my heart and flesh are weak to bear an untried pain, the bruised reed he will not break, but strengthen and sustain. What does that mean? There are some times in life where there's things that we can only learn by exercising our faith. And sometimes we think faith is this. We just blindly believe and we go about it, right? But faith, what if we thought about faith like a muscle that had to be exercised? Because there's little things that happen in life that some of us who've been Christians longer look at and see in other people's lives and like, man, you like God's got this, like don't worry about it. And there's things that happen in our life that there's people who've been walking with the Lord a lot longer that look back at us and go, hey, God's got this, don't worry about it. How is that? It's because we've all been in the gym of faith, and there's been loads that we've had to carry. There's been moments where we don't understand how things are going to work out, where we exercise and say, God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to obey. I'm going to be part of whatever you're telling me to be a part of, regardless of if I understand it. God, there's things that don't make sense, so I'm just going to trust you. And we exercise our faith by putting it to the task when it doesn't make sense. And then God makes it work out, and we go, wow, God, we can trust you for the next time. That's how we grow muscles, by putting weight and reps, and that's how we grow our faith. And for Paul, he's been through a lot of moments in his life where he's been brought to the end of himself. He's been beaten. He's now been shipwrecked. He's literally died. He's had to deal with people talking about his character and saying things about him that just aren't true. And he's had to walk through all of that while trying to follow Christ and being just ridiculed and tortured. And now he's in a moment of going, God, I've got to see what you can do in this part of my life. I've got to exercise some more faith. I believe what you've done back here, but now I've got to trust you right here and work it out in my life. Paul could do that because he wrote a verse like 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not shaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Listen to verse 10. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies. Listen, sometimes the only way that we can know the power of God is to get to a place where we question if God's supplying the power in our life enough because we can't depend on ourselves. When we come to the edge of ourselves, when we say, God, I can't do this, that's a moment where we say, I'm killing the flesh. I'm killing the desires of the flesh. I'm killing sin. And God, I'm trusting in you. And the life of Jesus and his power wells up in our life to where we can see that he supplies every need that we have. Now look in verse number 3. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on a fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened to his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. I think it's really important to point out that in verse number 3, the other people, the islanders, had built a fire, but Paul's one of these guys that he can't sit around idle. You know those people that, like, you go over to their house for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you're sitting there for a second, and, like, everybody's passed out because everybody ate way too much banana pudding, and then there's that one guy that's like, oh, time to mow the yard, right? And they, like, go out and start working. Like, that's kind of Paul. Like, he just can't sit around idle. And isn't that something just to admire about somebody? That this guy who's been shipwrecked, this guy who's now wondering if God's going to supply his every need, looks at a moment and goes, hey, I know that you're building a fire. Let me chip in. So he picks up some sticks, throws them on there. And the problem was he picked up one of those brown nope ropes. And when he picked it up, it came to life. The snake that, because it was cold, was laying there dormant and asleep on a pile of sticks. As soon as Paul put the sticks by the fire, the viper came alive and grabbed right onto his hand. Now, if you research this, I got a picture of a viper, not the car, but the actual viper that will come up. These are Maltese snakes. They're snakes that are on Malta. Now, if you research this, here's what you'll find out. Today, there are no venomous snakes in Malta. However, there is a group of vipers that do exactly what this passage is talking about, and they will latch onto your hand or whatever they bite into until basically you pry them off. Now, here's what's interesting about that. People now look at this and go, well, the Bible's wrong because there's not any venomous snakes there now. Well, can we just realize it's been 2,000 years? And some snakes may have adapted in 2,000 years to not be venomous, that the venomous ones may have been killed, that there may be some changes that have happened in 2,000 years to an animal to where it's not venomous anymore. Here's the other thing that we could also put out there. Hey, if God can make a fish big enough to swallow Jonah, Satan can probably make a snake venomous to bite Paul. That's a very possible thing. In fact, if you just think about the passage in verse 4, we know this is not a non-venomous snake because the islanders said, though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. That they're looking at the snake and they're going, that's venomous. He dead. D-E-D, dead, right? He's just going to die. Here's what's interesting, and it still happens today. When you and I go through storms of life, have you ever noticed how many forecasters come out to talk about the storm that you're going through? People love to give their input about why we're in storms of life, about how we're going to get out of them. People love to talk about, well, they just deserved that. Well, they were doing this, and now they're getting exactly what they deserved. In fact, Luke uses this word justice. Your Bible may have capitalized it, but it's the Greek word justice for a divine punishment. That these islanders are looking at Paul going, he deserved this. If he escaped the storm, then he's moved out of being killed by the storm. Now he's finally getting it through the snake. What were those movies several years ago? I saw these in my BC days. Some of y'all are going to know what they are. Where like the group of people escaped judgment, but they kept coming for them. Final Destination, I think it was, maybe. Is that the movie? Yeah, some of y'all have BC days like I do? Okay. But Final Destination type thing where these people are looking at Paul going, hey, you missed death back here, but death is coming for you, buddy. And Paul's having to sit there and listen to all the things that they're saying. And here's a statement I want you to pay attention to. Take a picture of it if you can. If you're a follower of Christ, problems don't always mean punishment for wrong. Sometimes problems are places for growth in our faith. We have a statement, Brantley, that should be in there after the picture of the viper. skip down one more. You're a follower of Christ. Problems don't always mean punishment for wrong. Sometimes problems are places for growth in our faith. And sometimes the only way that we learn things is to go into a problem. If life is great and life is easy, then we have to ask ourselves, how much do I really need God in this if it's so easy? In fact, look at the next statement that will come up on the screen. Problems don't mean God's supply or love for you are exhausted, even if you are exhausted from the problems. Problems don't mean God's supply or love for you are exhausted, even if you are exhausted from the problems. When you get down, Satan loves to whisper those doubts. Don't believe those a bit. Because listen, before you were born and went through what you went through, Jesus went to a cross to die for you. What infinite amount of love that God would love us before we were born, to show care for us, that when we knew that he knew that we would go through problems. He knew that we would go through tribulations. He knew that we would suffer in life, and he suffered for us to show his love for us. For Paul, he's having to suffer, and people are saying some things that are unfair about him, as people have said things that are untrue and unfair about us. And I think what the great theologian Elsa from the movie Frozen 1 and Frozen 2 said is just to let it go. Just let it go. In fact, look at verse 5. He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Here's what happens when you let go of what people say about us and we go about our day. People watch to see if it's true or not. Is if they can't rile us up to respond back to what they've said, they're going to watch and see if what they've said is actually true. In fact, look at this next statement that I come up for you. You can't control what people say about you, but you can control if it's true or not. You can't control what people are going to say, but you control whether it is true or not. What's interesting is this statement that they made about Paul, that he was a god. In other places, like in Acts chapter 14 that we talked about a couple of months ago, when Paul was in Lystra, people there called him a god, but they also sacrificed to him, that they offered worship to him. And there in Lystra, he began to preach and to respond to them that he was just a man. He began to talk about Jesus, but in this passage, we don't see him doing that. Why is that? I think there's really two perspectives. The first one is, we could just assume at this point in time that we know Paul's going to talk about Jesus. I mean, we just know that if Paul has an opportunity, he's just going to tell every person he can about Jesus. So we can assume, without Paul writing it into the book of Acts, that Paul began to preach. But also we could look at it this way, that Paul didn't respond because he saw no action behind what they were doing. And because their words didn't lead to action, he viewed the words as empty and not worthy of responding to. You know, there's a lot of people who say a lot of things, but they don't act out on it. The internet is a major dumpster fire of people just saying things with no recourse, right? Like you get onto, to whatever social media you get onto, and there's always like teddy bear loves you 1056789 at iCloud.com, and you're like, who is teddy bear 12345678910? But they always want to say something to rile people up, right? They love to argue, and they're like, that's a bot. But it could be a person. I don't know. But somebody likes just to argue. People love to say things and be keyboard warriors. People also love to say things and start rumors. And people love to be in control of narratives. People are pathological liars sometimes. Some people create conspiracy theories out of everything. And here's what all people have in common who do this. Lots of noise, but no action. I like to think about them like a burnout car. I got a picture of a burnout car if you don't know what a burnout car is. This is a car specifically designed to do burnouts. That's all they do with this car is they do these huge burnouts. It's a massive thing down in Australia. You can watch videos on it later. But here's the thing about a burnout. Lots of noise, but no action. That there's people out there that, man, they'll raise up problems, but they'll never do anything about it. Man, they'll complain all the time, but they'll never bring solutions. And what we have to do as Christians is to sit back and evaluate if responding is worth our time. Listen to this, it'll come up on the screen for you. God's plans for you don't outrun the supply of character he's developing in you. And when people begin to say things and people begin to just say empty words that don't do a lot, but they're an attack on us, as these islanders were doing to Paul, Paul had to sit back and go, I'm not going to respond because the character that's inside of me is stronger than the things they're saying about me. In fact, Paul would write to his young protege, Timothy, in 2 Timothy 2:23, and he would say, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. I got several family members who are more country than cornbread and more country than sorghum and other stuff. And one of my favorite sayings for them is, quarrels are like getting in a wrestling match with a pig. Everybody gets dirty. Quarrels are like getting in a wrestling match with a pig. Everybody gets dirty. You ever found out that, man, when you start arguing with somebody, you'll lose your mind just as much as they lose their mind, and nobody gets their opinion changed, right? It's just blah, 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 back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Paul in this moment, he could have chose to engage, but instead, he's like, you know what? I'll let them say what they want to say. I'm just going to keep on doing me. I'll ignore it. I'll ghost them. I'll just keep doing my thing because that's what God has called me to do. In fact, look down at verse number 7. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. Look at verse number 10. This is amazing. They also honored us greatly. And when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. Don't you love verse 10? Think about where Paul was in verse 1. Shipwrecked, no supplies, no ship, no anything. And here at the end of verse 10, after just a couple of days, after a couple of months, as we found out later in Acts chapter 28, they've gotten a ship that has stayed there all winter. They've gotten all of their needs met. And I just want to remind you that even in a desolate place like an island, God's plans never outrun his provision. And man, this morning you may feel like you were all alone. You may feel like God hadn't been there with you. You may feel like you were just beyond any help. You may feel like there's no way God can come through in this season of life. And let me tell you, don't believe the lies of Satan. Let's look at this main statement that'll come up again. God's plans never outrun his provision. God's called you to it, God will take you through it. If God has brought you to it, he will walk with you with everything that you need. So what do we do in response to this? I'll tell you 3 quick things and we'll be done. First thing is this: be a contributor, not a consumer. Be a contributor, not a consumer. God's plan for us will lead us to contribute even in seasons when we feel empty. Contributing is not just financial. Contributing is serving. Contributing is loving. Contributing is prayer. Contributing is using the spiritual gift that God has given you to make a difference in the local church to impact the kingdom. Even when we are exhausted and when we are depleted, we trust in God and we serve God because we know he meets all of our needs. In fact, listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 6:33. He says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Verse 34, therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Listen, Jesus wouldn't say to not be anxious if we weren't going to have moments where we might be anxious, where we might wonder what's going on, where we might wonder how this is going to work out, where we might need to go to a doctor and say, hey, I got some chemical things that I need to get fixed here. I need to get some help from you, doctor. I may need to go to a counselor and talk about how to deal with some anxiety things in my life to learn just to calm down. And I also may need to learn some truth from God's word to remember that I can rely on God, that I can keep going with God because his plans never take me beyond his provision. The second thing is this: let what you know be louder than what others say. Let what you know be louder than what others say. Paul heard all the sayings. Paul heard the Greek word for justice, and he sat there and just let it roll off his shoulders. But the sayings didn't control his heart. Just because it goes in your ears doesn't mean it has to control your heart. But sometimes we just need to sit back and think on what is true, remind ourselves of what God has called us to. And if God has called us to it, he's going to provide to get us through it. Don't let what you hear from God be discounted by what you hear from people. Remember, God is eternally living, and people are mortal and have a small view of things to come. Have you ever been in a moment of life? In fact, we'll just prove this. Have you ever been in a moment of life and you've wondered how things were going to work out? And when they finally did work out, you found out God was doing things back when you were wondering and anxious and full of anxiety that you're like, man, if I had known that, then I would have been a lot more peaceful. Anybody had those moments happen before? Hands all over the place. Sometimes when we're in seasons of life and it feels like nothing is happening, that's when God is the most active. Working in ways we don't see to bring things to happen that can only be seen through faith. Third and the final thing, bless out of your blessing. Bless out of your blessing. Paul, if we could just make a list of all the things he has lost so far, would seem to be the most unblessed, cursed person in the world. He's lost everything. But Paul, even in the small thing of building a fire, decided, you know what? I can help. He went over and grabbed some sticks, put them on the fire. We're going to find out later, as you keep reading through the Bible, that Paul, as he does eventually make it to Rome, Paul is sitting in jail and literally reaches the world for Christ through sitting in a jail cell. It's incredible. Here's what happened. Paul would be sitting beside a guard, and every guard would take various shifts throughout the day. So a guard would come up to Paul, lash a chain onto his arm, lash a chain onto the soldier's arm, and have to sit there with Paul for roughly 4 to 5 hours every single day. You know what Paul did? Hey, I'm Paul. Tell me your life story. Really? Well, let me tell you about Jesus and how he's changed my life. And he would do that for 4 hours. The guy would go, all right, it's time for my shift to end. He'd undo the chain, put the chain down, get up and leave, walk by the guard and go, hey, just buckle up for 4 hours, man. The guard would come over and sit down. Paul, hey, my name is Paul. What's your name? What's your life story? Let me tell you about Jesus. Now he changed my life. And Paul did that over and over and over and over again. And he would even say that what has happened to him has happened to spread the gospel. How did that happen? These soldiers that were with Paul would go all over the world. And as they went all over the world, they would take the message of Jesus with them. Because Paul decided that he was blessed so eternally that no matter what happened here on this earth, he could bless other people. He could share the message of the gospel with people. He could tell people about a God who looked out at the world and created everything in existence. And the world has disobeyed God, has pushed God away, and we've done it, man, willingly, and we desired to do it. But God loved us so much. He loved his creation. He loved you. He loved me, that he sent his only son down to the world that has ridiculed him and has rejected him and has pushed away his prophets and pushed away the things that God has done, and that Jesus came to die on a cross to take a punishment that you and I fully deserved, and he did not have to do it. And Jesus, when he died on the cross, he took the entire world's sin upon him, and he went to a grave, and he was in the grave for 3 days, and he resurrected, and resurrecting, he beat death, hell, in the grave, and he lives forevermore sitting at the right hand of the Father. And that when you and I ask God to forgive us of our sins, and we give our lives to him and say, God, I want to live for you, I want to know you, I want to love you, we commit ourselves to him as the Lord of our life, and then God puts his Spirit into us to help us live out the commitment that we've made so that we can do as Paul did. We can bless out of the blessing. Here's my question for you. Are you looking at life going, I've run out of everything? There's two options. Maybe God's allowed you to run out of everything just to look back to him. Maybe this is your moment where you're going, God, I've run out of everything in my life. I can't trust in myself. I'm at the end of myself, and you've never given your life to Jesus, because today is your day to do that. God's allowed those things to happen in your life so that you come to the end of yourself to trust in him. And maybe you're here and you're a believer and you're a Christian. Man, you feel like you've run out of everything. You're at the end of your rope and you just don't know what to do. And this is a great time just to continue being faithful to God, because God will not let his plans go beyond his provision. Maybe right now is a moment of your faith just being stretched and grown and man, just worked out in your life to see that it's going to come to fruition. Maybe you need some friends in your life. Man, there's people in our squads at 9:45 on Sundays, 6:45 on Wednesday nights that would love to pray with you, support you, care for you, and love you. Our church would love to be able to pray for you. I would love to be able to pray for you. In fact, there's a QR code on the back of the chair in front of you. And if you're here today and you're like, man, I feel like I just need to grow my faith. There's some things that I just got questions. Then listen, you can scan that QR code, put a connection card in as one of the options, and send that in. I'd love to call and pray with you and see how we can minister to you as a church.